to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Follow-up to the War with Sweden post. When last we left the particular group, my Wednesday night group that has been engaging in a grim and gritty cyberpunk-style game in the Victory system, they'd accidentally started a war with Sweden. More or less accidentally. They were convinced that a professor at UCLA for a new institute from Sweden called the Nexialism Institute had been behind a botched bank robbery in which some people died. And while they were unable to find anything like a single shred of proof or evidence, they managed to vandalize his office to such a degree that the institute for which he worked was sending investigators out from Sweden. The party was convinced this was part of some elaborate bank robbery plot, despite the fact that they are the ones who caused the damage, making the investigating team necessary, and worked to hinder the investigating team to the point where the plane was destroyed by an orbital laser by a dark, shadowy corporation. All the players' fault. Plane was under diplomatic protection by the Swedish government, an ambassadorial plane in effect, and so a state of war existed and would be announced the next morning. I didn't do any of that. That was that game. I had plans for it, but the last time I tried to run a grim and gritty cyberpunk game for this group, one of the characters ended up being a green space bear master of disguise. This was my attempt to run a slightly more serious game, and I used a different technique. I've talked about my suddenly a shot rings out technique, where I let the characters settle in, find out a little bit about themselves, engage in a conversation, then suddenly a shot rings out. Something happens requiring them to react. In this case, an explosion down the street. They tracked it down to a bank robbery, and at that point in time, everything was based on their questions, their actions, what they were expecting to find out, and giving them something just off from that to keep the momentum going. They made decisions about how they were going to handle things, and I, rather than come up with a long and complex set of events for them to have to deal with, I had 2 or 3 key things in the background, a series of bombs and a vague, shadowy overfigure, but everything else was a result of the consequences of their actions. War with Sweden. The next session started up, and it's not that the group was what I would call paralyzed exactly. It's that they'd had a couple of weeks to review where they were at and how they got there. They had a couple of ideas about how to try and influence events, but they didn't have anything like a plan. And really, I don't know what a cop, a medical nanomorph, a freelance ambulance driver, a scavenger, and a really distracted hacker. What they were going to do to prevent World War III, I don't know. There was a transfer of bank materials that they were worried about, deeds that contained properties which had demilitarized silos in them, decommissioned nuclear silos and some interceptor silos that still had missiles in them, but the missiles didn't have warheads or fuel and were in a cyberpunk post-fuel world, so they weren't really that much of a problem, but the group kind of fixated on them. They follow the transfer of bank materials. This is where I could have thrown in a Mad Max-esque chase scene, but the whole group didn't go. There wasn't interest in stopping this anymore. They just kind of wanted to see what was happening. If you have given your group a potential Mad Max-esque chase scene or some kind of vehicular drive around blow stuff up scene, and most of them are like, no, I think I'm going to sit here and see what happens. Your group doesn't want that scene. Even if one person in that group wants to go do it, then you don't want that one person to be rolling dice for 2.5 hours on their vehicle control rolls while everyone else is like, I'm going to read a newspaper. Do I make a roll for that? Not much happened. The bank documents got to the federal building. There wasn't much of a hitch. They waited for war to hit. It was one of those situations where, what does the group do? I was not in a position, I didn't have an NPC in the game. I did not have a character representing me and the opinions of the universe in the group. That's one of the things that made it the situation that it was. There wasn't someone there telling them how to handle things. I left it up to them, and they jumped straight into a bigger pond with bigger sharks than they were capable of dealing with, and it became a problem. What happened was, just before war is declared, the news announces that some brave academic from UCLA who had just had his lab vandalized stepped up, went to the embassies, and prevented the war. The person that they are sure was the supervillain went and became the hero of the United States and indeed the world, and is now on the talk show circuit, having saved everyone. Then he walked into the coffee shop where they were watching the news. This could have gone a number of ways. They are aware the villain has been compiling all of humanity's martial arts into a single form, that he is smarter than they are, more psychologically adept than they are, and if push comes to shove, he would probably wipe the coffee shop with them. However, they had some advantages. They outnumbered him. They had collectively more strength than him. They had weird abilities in the form of a medical nanomorph and some magic in their bailiwick. It would have been a very interesting fight. They might not all have walked away from it. So this villain, who as much as admitted he was, in fact, in part a villain, sat down, ordered a coffee, sat down at their table after asking permission to do so, and simply said, "What the hell?" An awkward conversation was had. If you're a game master and you get a little tired of the fight of the week, or the big grandstanding diplomatic, have an awkward conversation or two. They are extremely informative. They tell you a lot about the characters, and the awkward conversations where people let their guards down a little bit around people that maybe they shouldn't, but it happens on both sides, so it's awkward but informative. Not only will that move your plot along, but you'll find out a lot about those characters, and maybe a little bit about your players. Hagens Vai admitted that, yes, he had made suggestions to the geology professor that led to the botched bank robbery. He had not instructed the professor in how to do it. He had used his advanced educational psychology techniques to give him the confidence he needed to do the things that he might have already been inclined to do, but lacked the confidence or the belief in his abilities to do them. A moment of instant competence that wouldn't last. The geology professor was fully guilty. All the decisions that were made in that bank robbery were his. Vai needed the bank's security compromised so he could access the deeds. He wasn't after the nuclear silos. No, he was after a very, very nice spa in Palos Verdes, where Marineland used to be. And now it's just a gorgeous place. Vic and I were doing some Google Maps tourism and spotted as he wanted to see Marineland, and we looked, and it's where my wife's brother was married. They'd torn down Marineland, and it was a nice wedding chapel. Now, 20 years later, it is a beautiful spa and resort, swimming pools and water slides, and it looks like, if you can be arrested for driving there while making under $50,000 a year. It's a nice spot, and the Nexialist Institute wanted to get their hands on those deeds without having to spend years dealing with the probate, so that they could put an institute adjunct there. Vai then asks the party if they want one of the silos, because he has no interest in them. They're decommissioned, and if there are interceptors in there, they have no warheads or fuel. If the party wants to go to the effort to fuel one back up and launch it off, so long as you stay out of my hair, sure, go ahead. Knock yourselves out. And then the cop, who had been fired for pursuing this thing without any evidence, past all reason, and assaulting some folks and starting a nuclear panic in Los Angeles, as you do, asked him for a job. This is not the first time this has happened in one of my games. And, come to think of it, it was about the best possible outcome I could expect. This game can now proceed. This game can now proceed in a world that was a few hours ago on a brink of a world war. Where shadowy corporations do exist and do blow up planes occasionally, and maybe there's someone out there who isn't really associated with the law anymore who can do something about this. Of course, I played this as though the supervillain had planned to recruit the party all along. If I can either kill you all or hire you. You're extremely efficient at doing terrible things, and I might need someone like that. So the party gets a headquarters and a salary and a lawyer's phone number in case they get into real trouble, and someone who can give them information and direct them, as opposed to me dropping a situation in front of them and watching them run off like cats surrounding someone firing a starter pistol and accidentally starting wars with Sweden. I like me a fight of the week format. In the Dungeons & Dragons game that I run, a demo game at the Game Chest at Del Amo Mall on Tuesday nights. If you're in the area, drop by. 6 to 9. That I run as Fight of the Week. It's D&D. People are looking for experience and levels. And you've got books full of monsters. Fight of the Week. It means that I can spend 30 to 45 minutes setting up a situation, and then the group can walk into it, and by the end of the time they've had a fight. They've got some experience points. Everyone's feeling a little pumped up. They've taken some hit point damage. Some folks might have lost a character. Rarely, it happens. Sometimes, however, the fight of the week is the least interesting thing you can do. Oh, it's exciting. Fights are always exciting. Well, usually. When everyone's got a chance of winning and everyone's got a chance of losing, and people are losing shrugs and hit points and spending risk right and left, and the dice are flying, yeah, there's some adrenaline there. Fight of the week. It's a good format, but sometimes things more interesting than fights happen. A conversation with the supervillain that can lead to the fight, or it can lead to the party having a new patron. My patron's game last night. Hi guys. Some cybernetics got stolen, full body frames that were extremely valuable, but none of the brainware to go in them. They'd need to have things installed in them, like brains. And magic was involved, and there was a guard under a curse of sleep, and there was new kinds of magic involved, and so they tracked this stuff down to a house in Chesterfield. I'm running the game in St. Louis. The house in Chesterfield is the one that I used to live in. I didn't tell my patrons this exactly, but when I was describing the property and mentioned that it was really, really hard to mow the backyard, they might have gotten a hint. And it's the cult of one of the new gods of darkness, and they're growing these horrific roses out back that are half rose, half Carolina Reaper and ghost chilies, and they don't know what's going on, but they know there's a magic user in there with curse magic that's rare and prescribed, and they're worshiping the dark gods, so they have not been as stealthy as they think they have been. They've been sneaking around this suburban house in a suburb of St. Louis. Chesterfield is not an unwealthy place. The cops have been called because these people don't really, well, one of them is subtle, the rest of them aren't, and the subtle one wasn't rolling well. They walk into this house, and one, the cultists are ready for them. Two, they're in the middle of a surgery. It is not going well, and the surgeon tells them if one of them isn't a surgeon, they need to leave or this woman's going to die. That was sexy. That was a moment. That was where the fight could still have happened. It was just one woman across the room talking. Yeah, she's over an operating table. There's someone on it. Things don't look like they're going well. Everyone in there is really tense. But the stolen cyberware is there up against the wall. There's women in robes, one with a gun, one wielding dark forbidden magic. There was a fight there waiting to happen. They didn't have the fight. The medically trained member of the group steps forward and assists the surgeon, and everyone else sits back, is a little tense, but they engage in conversation. They find out what these people are about, what their histories are, what their motivations are, who they're worshiping, and why. It led to a new story arc in the game that is going to be fascinating to run, and I'm really looking forward to it. 2 weeks, folks. Probably about 2 weeks. Every role-playing game produced, just about every role-playing game produced, has a extensive percentage of its rule set based on combat. This is about how they've always been. Combat is a fairly complex portion of the simulation experience that is a role-playing game, and you want to do it right. There are things you want to be able to simulate, and questions people ask, well, how close do I have to be? How hard is it for me to do this? How do I hit? How do I take damage? How do I do damage? Are there special things I can do in combat? What if I feint or try to flank? What if I hit them from behind out of concealment? There are so many rules necessary to run combat correctly. You can do it in very few with a really good narrative system, but for the most part, look at a role-playing book and there's a chunk of it. Combat. Dungeons and Dragons in its early days, and a lot of the early on role-playing games, the ones that people my age cut our teeth on. You get experience for killing monsters, or killing bandits, or killing bad guys, and kill bad guys, take their stuff, lather, rinse, repeat. And nothing wrong with that. That's some of the core of the system. But as we got older, as everyone gets older, as the society grows, and as the hobby grows, there are a couple of other things people like to do. You like to find out what you're fighting. You learn about the monsters. Find out the motivations behind these people. Yeah, there's an evil wizard in the tower. Does he know any cool stuff? The War with Sweden situation could have gone to running through burning streets, shooting looters, and fighting zombies. There was a good aspect of zombie apocalypse waiting to happen there. I had zombies on tap. I had combat cyborg zombie robot ninjas right in the wings, ready to come on stage should it come to that. This should come as no surprise. I always have those in the wings ready to come on stage. Doesn't matter what the game is, just always do. And I do not, as a game master, necessarily discourage combat. It's an option. There are options on the table. Combat is one of them. Someone can get stupid and pull a gun. Someone can decide, fuck it, we're done with this talking stuff. Let's kick some ass. It's not a choice I get to make as a game master. Game masters and dungeon masters for as long as the hobby has existed have tried to make that decision. I've written monologues for the villain to deliver at the right moment for the maximum emotional impact. Here's the story up to this point in time. Here's the climax of the story, and now the villain is going to deliver this speech and explain what everything is about, and maybe make people know they're going to kill him. He gets 3 words. I was like, oh my god, he's monologuing. Quick, take the shot. You write 3 monologues as a game master. You write 3 that get lit on fire and kicked down a flight of stairs before you get the first paragraph done, and then you stop writing monologues. 1, you learn to improvise. 2, you learn to talk a little bit faster. And 3, you don't rely on that being the story or the moment. But the more I've come to realize that a lot of parties are going to light the villain on fire and kick them down the stairs before they get their monologue out, the more I've also realized some parties will stop the fight to say, what the hell is your people's deal? Why are we fighting? What is happening here? You got to be prepared to go both ways. And there isn't a way that is better or worse. There isn't a way that is right or wrong. It's all story. How the story goes, well, the game master can have an idea of how the story is going to go, but that's just an idea. That's a rough guideline. That's a pencil sketch on the outline. And if the party decides that they're going to bypass the carefully set trap and go beat up the hot dog vendor across the street for information, that's the story. The game master's there to facilitate the story. This is the story for the PCs. This is the player character story. And if the player character story is we're going to go beat up an innocent hot dog vendor and force him to give us information he doesn't have, and then I'm going to get a hot dog because that's going to, burn calories. That's the story. Nothing wrong with that. If you get a laugh out of it, that's awesome. If you get some groans, that's fine. Some tears are wonderful when you can get some tears out, when you get emotion, when everyone walks away from it, telling that story for years to have. Defeating the trap, that might be something you talk about for a couple of weeks, but beating up the hot dog vendor, you're never going to stop telling that story. So now there is a Grim and Gritty cyberpunk group that is working for a supervillain. He doesn't have terrible motivations. He's an academic. He's interested in research and a better world, ultimately, maybe in a way that the player characters wouldn't agree with, but maybe one that they would. They're still thinking about it. That's more interesting. That gives me more to work with. That gives me a way to inject information into the party so that they're not running around like cats in a starter pistol. That means that everything leading up to the war with Sweden was a prologue. And now we can start a serious and proper deep campaign. My patrons group, they're working for an organization that wants to further the future and destiny of mankind. But now they're also teamed up with Lilith, the dark goddess of flame and darkness, and working with her coven to go beat up Nazis. And yeah, the situation's complicated, but complicated situations make for good stories, up to a point. Everyone's got a story at this point. Everyone's got a potential for even more complex and deep stories. Their characters have places to go, things to do, motivations to think out. You've got people who are engaged, who are laughing and thinking. And whether there's combat involved or not, when you've got people laughing and thinking with engaged characters and stories to tell at the end of the night, you're doing it right. Well, thank you for following me along on this particular rant. TLDR, war with Sweden has been averted, and now the group works for a supervillain. And I couldn't be happier. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video, give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. If you'd like to see these videos when they come out, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. If you do hit the subscribe button, hit the little notification bell so that you're alerted when the videos are released. If you have your own experiences with combat and role-playing games or a lack of combat and role-playing games, if your party has worked for a supervillain in the past, or you have other interests, role-playing stories or questions or comments or things you'd like to hear me talk about, leave me a comment. You'll love leaving me a comment. I'll love getting a comment. If you'd like to help out in a little more substantial way, I invite you to hit me up my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/ScottCorum, and consider donating. Absolutely anything helps. Allows me to make better videos more often. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. I'm Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me, and I'll see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.